She had everything money could build: $1 billion empire, an army of trained guards, and a security system no one could crack. But tonight, inside a pitch-black waterfront warehouse, Amelia Sterling was on her knees. Her guards were gone. Her phones were dead. And the man holding a pen to her face was someone she had trusted with her life. The only person moving through the darkness to reach her was the man she had laughed at in front of a room full of people. A quiet driver. A single father. And the most dangerous man she had ever underestimated. Oh, channel engagement. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because the stories we tell on this channel will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and leave a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now settle in. This one doesn't let go. The morning Mason Reed showed up to Orion Systems for the first time, he was 12 minutes late. Not because he overslept. He had been awake since 5, making his daughter's lunch, braiding her hair badly enough that she complained about it twice before they reached the school gates, and then sitting in his truck for 4 minutes in the parking lot because the check engine light had come on again, and he needed a moment to decide whether to panic about it now or panic about it later. He chose later. He parked in the service lot, the back lot, the one with the broken overhead light and the faded contractor vehicles only sign, and walked in through the loading entrance carrying a thermos of coffee that had gone cold somewhere on the I-5. He wore a gray jacket, dark work pants, and boots that had been resoled once already. He looked exactly like what his badge said he was: a contract worker. Maintenance and transport. The kind of man buildings needed to function and rooms emptied of when the important people arrived. Nobody looked at him twice. That was fine. Mason had spent years cultivating precisely that kind of invisibility, and he was good at it the way some men are good at card tricks, naturally, without effort, because the skill had been built into him during years when being unseen was the difference between completing a mission and not coming home at all. He signed in at the contractor desk, nodded at the security guy who didn't bother learning his name, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor where the building systems room was located. He had a list. Ventilation filter replacement, west corridor, exterior camera junction box, level 2. Generator secondary fuel check, basement, straightforward work. The kind of work that required competence but not conversation. He liked it that way. Orion Systems occupied the top 6 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, and from the outside it looked exactly like what it was: the headquarters of a company that sold the idea of safety to people who could afford to buy it. The lobby had that particular brand of corporate confidence: brushed steel, muted lighting, the faint hum of climate control set precisely 2 degrees cooler than comfort, and the staff moved through it with the smooth efficiency of people who believed in what they were selling. What they were selling was Amelia Sterling, not the company, exactly. The company was impressive enough on paper. Orion's integrated security infrastructure was installed in 43 corporate campuses, 11 federal facilities, and the private estates of people whose net worth had too many digits to count quickly. But the reason institutional investors kept adding zeros to their checks wasn't the product. It was her. The person who had built it. The 30-year-old who had taken a mid-sized tech firm her family had run into the ground, gutted it to the studs, and rebuilt it into something that genuinely frightened competitors. Amelia Sterling was not a person who inspired warm feelings. She inspired something sharper, a mix of admiration and wariness that most people in her orbit couldn't entirely separate. She was direct in a way that felt less like a personality trait and more like a policy. She made decisions fast, and she made them alone. And if you disagreed with one of them, you'd better come prepared with data, because gut feeling wasn't a currency she accepted. She was brilliant. That part wasn't in dispute. She was also, on the morning Mason showed up 12 minutes late, preparing for the most important investor presentation Orion Systems had ever hosted. The conference room on the 31st floor had been set up since 7 a.m. Catering arranged, audiovisual confirmed. The presentation tested 3 times by 2 different people. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Elliott Bay, and the light coming in off the water was exactly the kind of light that made expensive rooms look even more expensive. 16 investors, combined portfolio exposure in the 9-figure range. The pitch was for Orion's next-generation integrated threat response platform, a system that promised to replace reactive security with predictive security, not responding to breaches after they happened, but preventing them before they started. Behavioral analytics, network pattern recognition, AI-assisted anomaly detection. The kind of pitch that required absolute confidence in the product. Amelia delivered it without notes. She stood at the head of the table in a dark blazer, no jewelry except a single watch, and she walked those 16 people through the architecture of her system with the calm specificity of someone who had built it component by component and understood exactly what each piece did and why. She was good at this. Not charming exactly, but precise in a way that was its own form of persuasion. Numbers delivered without hesitation, questions answered before they were fully asked. 40 minutes in, she was wrapping the capability demonstration when the door at the back of the room opened. It was Mason. He didn't walk in confidently. He stood in the doorway, holding a small toolkit, and he looked at the room the way anyone would look at a room they'd walked into by mistake, with immediate awareness that he was wrong to be there, followed by the specific calculation of whether to leave fast or stay and address it. He stayed. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't apologetic in the performative way people get when they're trying to manage an impression. He just said it plainly, the way you'd say it to one person rather than 16. "I need to check the junction box behind the presentation panel. 15 minutes. I can come back after if... This room is booked." Amelia's voice didn't rise. She didn't need volume to create the impression of weight. "Until 11. "Yes, ma'am, I know. I have a work order. The junction box was flagged for... Then come back at 11. There was a beat. One of the investors shifted in his chair. The room had that particular silence that settles when a subordinate is being corrected in front of witnesses. Mason looked at her steadily. Not combatively. Not with the blank deference of someone absorbing a dismissal and swallowing it. Something more considered. Like he was deciding something. "The junction box connects to your surveillance relay on this floor," he said. "The relay that's feeding live signal to your external monitoring network. I flagged this yesterday because there's a junction fault, intermittent dropout. You have cameras on this floor that show continuous green status but have been dropping signal for between 3 and 7 seconds at irregular intervals over the last 18 hours. The room was very quiet. "That's a gap in your perimeter coverage," Mason continued. "While you're hosting 16 people in a room, your system is supposed to be watching. I'd recommend letting me fix it before your presentation concludes rather than after." Amelia looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her head of security, Hunter Cole, who was standing near the side wall with the practiced stillness of a man who got paid to look like he had everything handled. Hunter gave a small shake of his head. "We ran a full diagnostic this morning. Everything checked clean." "Your diagnostic checks for complete signal failure," Mason said. He wasn't arguing. He was just correct, in the flat way that accurate information is correct. "It doesn't detect intermittent dropout below a threshold of 10 seconds. I was checking the physical hardware." Another silence. This was the moment Amelia would replay later in the warehouse with different lighting. She would replay it and see it differently. But in the room, with 16 investors watching, what she heard was a maintenance contractor contradicting her security chief during the most significant pitch of her fiscal year. "Your name," she said. "Mason Reed." "Mr. Reed." She said it the way people say a name when they've already decided the conversation is over. "My team has deployed and maintained security infrastructure for federal agencies and Fortune 100 companies. I appreciate the report. Someone will follow up on your work order." She paused, and what happened next was something she couldn't entirely explain afterward. A small pivot toward performance, an instinct to demonstrate to the room that she was unruffled, in control, that the interruption was manageable. She turned slightly toward the investors. One of the drawbacks of a fully human maintenance team, occasionally the instinct to identify problems outpaces the data. She said it with a small, dry smile. A room management move. The kind of thing that landed when you had credibility to spend. A couple of investors smiled. Mason didn't. She looked back at him. "I'd suggest returning at 11, as I said, and perhaps consulting with your direct supervisor about the appropriate time and method to escalate maintenance concerns." It was a dismissal. Not cruel. She didn't do cruelty. She considered it inefficient, but exact. Calibrated. The kind of sentence that was meant to land and close a topic. Mason picked up his toolkit from the doorframe. He looked at her with the same steadiness he'd had throughout. Not hurt, not angry. Something more neutral. The expression of a man who has said the thing that needed saying and accepts that he can't control what happens next. "I'll come back at 11, he said. Then he left. And he said nothing else. No parting shot, no visible bruising. He simply turned and walked out and let the door close behind him with a sound that was perfectly, almost irritatingly quiet. The meeting concluded at 10:50. It went well. Two of the investors committed to expanded positions before their cars arrived. Amelia was at her desk by 11:15, reading through the morning's summary documents, when her assistant knocked and came in. "The maintenance contractor is asking if he can finish the junction work." "Let him in." She didn't look up from what she was reading. An hour later, Mason appeared in her doorway. He had a clipboard. He set it on the edge of her desk without ceremony. "Work orders complete," he said. "Junctions repaired. Your relays running clean signal. I documented the fault. The dropout pattern started roughly 22 hours ago and originated at a physical connection point, not software. Your morning diagnostic wouldn't have caught it." She looked at the clipboard, then at him. "Thank you," she said. She meant it, even if the words came out sounding less like gratitude and more like acknowledgement of a fact. "It will be reviewed." Mason nodded. He started to turn. She said, without quite knowing why she said it, "What made you notice it?" He stopped, turned back, unhurried. "I was checking the wiring route for the generator circuit," he said. "The junction box was on the same wall. I saw the indicator light cycling wrong. Too fast, not steady. Took me about 2 minutes to trace." "But you didn't just report it through the facility's ticket system." "I did yesterday afternoon," he said. "Nobody followed up by morning." She held his gaze. He held hers without difficulty. "The ticket system has a 48-hour response window for non-critical flags," she said. "I know," he said. "I just didn't think intermittent coverage gaps in a facility running active investor meetings were non-critical. I might be wrong about that." He said it without sarcasm. That was the part that got under her skin a little. If he'd been combative or resentful, she could have categorized him and moved on. He wasn't. He was just steady and honest and slightly annoying in the specific way that honest people are annoying when you've just embarrassed them publicly and they've declined to make you feel bad about it. "You're not wrong," she said. Something crossed his face. Not victory, more like the small, tired satisfaction of having someone finally confirm what you already knew. "Appreciate it," he said. And then he left. She turned back to her desk. It was later that afternoon, 3:47, she would remember, because she'd been checking a meeting schedule, when the email came in from Hunter Cole flagging Mason Reed's contractor file for her review. "Thought you'd want context on the maintenance guy from this morning. Former military, Navy SEAL, did about 13 years before he left the program. No reason for concern. He's been on contract here about 3 weeks. Clean background check. Works transport and maintenance. Has a kid. Lives in Tacoma." She read it twice. Then she set her phone face down and went back to the documents she'd been reviewing. She filed the information away the way she filed most things. Noted, categorized, moved past. A former SEAL who now changed ventilation filters and drove contractor vehicles. Life went in unexpected directions. That wasn't remarkable. What was remarkable, she told herself, was the Q4 infrastructure proposal sitting on her desk that still needed her comments before Thursday. She picked up her pen. Outside, in the parking lot, Mason sat in his truck for 3 minutes eating a sandwich and reading a text from his daughter that said, "Can we have tacos tonight?" And he responded, "Yes." And then he started the engine and pulled out of the contractor lot and drove south toward the elementary school where she was waiting. The check engine light was still on. He decided to panic about it tomorrow. The tacos were good. His daughter, Lily, ate 2.5 and talked for 40 minutes straight about a girl in her class named Priya who had brought a lizard to school in her backpack, and the lizard had gotten loose during math, and the teacher had screamed, and Lily found this to be the funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of organized education. Mason listened to the whole thing. He asked the right questions at the right moments. He laughed when she laughed. He cleaned up the kitchen while she did homework at the table, and he helped her with a word problem about train schedules that was poorly worded enough to genuinely confuse him for a moment, which made Lily feel better about being confused by it too. He put her to bed at 9. She was asleep by 9:10. Then he sat at the kitchen table with the day spread out in front of him, not physically, just in his head. And he let himself think about Amelia Sterling for a few minutes, the way you let yourself think about a problem you can't solve yet, not obsessively, not with any particular emotion attached, just turning it over. He'd worked in enough high-security environments to recognize the gap between a system that looked good on paper and a system that actually functioned when it mattered. Orion's setup was impressive, no question. The infrastructure was well-designed, the hardware was quality, the staffing was professional on the surface. But there were seams, places where the architecture assumed the people operating it were aligned with the organization's interests. Places where the whole thing could be quietly redirected if someone on the inside knew where to apply pressure. He'd flagged the junction issue because it was real, and because he didn't have a habit of ignoring real things. The way she'd handled it in the meeting, using him as a punchline, briefly, to smooth the room over, he'd cataloged that and let it go. People under pressure made status moves. That was human. It didn't particularly bother him. What bothered him, sitting at his kitchen table at 9:30 with the refrigerator humming and Lily's spelling worksheet still on the counter, was a quieter thing. It was the way Hunter Cole had stood in that room. The small head shake, the studied calm, the specific expression of a man who was very carefully not reacting to something. Mason had been in enough rooms with enough different kinds of men to recognize the difference between someone who was confident because they knew the situation was under control and someone who was confident because they knew something no one else in the room knew. Hunter Cole had the second kind of confidence. Mason sat with that for a while. Then he closed it off, put it in a drawer somewhere in his head, and went to bed. I was back at Orion the next morning at 7:45. Different work order. Exterior camera housing on level 2, routine maintenance, should have taken about 90 minutes. He parked in the contractor lot, signed in, took the stairs because the service elevator had been slow all week and he didn't like waiting. The level 2 corridor was empty at that hour. He found the camera housing, opened the service panel, checked the connections. Everything looked clean. He was about to close it back up when he noticed the housing's orientation was slightly off. Not enough to trigger an alert in the system, but enough that the field of view would clip the corner of the east corridor entrance. Maybe 4 feet of blind spot, small, unintentional looking. He stood there for a moment studying it. Then he took out his phone and checked the other camera positions on his work order schematic. He found 2 more. Different angles, different floors, but each with a minor orientation issue that had the same practical effect, creating a small, consistent gap in the coverage of the building's main circulation routes. He documented all 3, filed a correction report through the system. Then he went back to his truck during his lunch break and sat with his coffee, going cold again, and thought about the geometry of those gaps. Each one individually was explicable as installation drift, vibration settling, any number of things. But 3 of them, in 3 specific locations that happened to complement each other's blind spots? Mason had done enough reconnaissance in his life to recognize the shape of something that had been deliberately arranged. He sat with that for a long time. The event that pulled everything into motion happened 4 days later, on a Thursday evening, and it began the way a lot of catastrophic things begin, with a schedule change that seemed routine. Amelia had a standing private dinner meeting the 3rd Thursday of every month. Business, not social. A rotating group of senior stakeholders, done quietly at a private dining space near the waterfront. No public announcement, minimal digital footprint. The guest list varied, the location occasionally shifted, but the general format was consistent. Hunter coordinated the security detail for these evenings personally. Mason found out about the Thursday evening run by accident. He'd been assigned a late maintenance shift, generator fuel check in the basement, something that had been bumped twice and needed to get done before the weekend. And he was finishing up around 6:30 when the loading bay door opened and 3 of the security team's vehicles pulled in for a pre-departure inspection. He heard the radios, heard enough of the communication to understand there was a convoy movement scheduled for 7:15. He didn't think much of it initially. He finished his fuel check, filled out his log, was heading back to the elevator when he ran into Crane, one of the junior transport coordinators, a young guy named Derek Crane, who was nervous about almost everything and compensated by talking too much. "You're still here?" Crane said. "Just finishing up?" "We've got a convoy in 20. They need a backup driver. Petrov called out sick." Mason looked at him. "I'm maintenance and transport on this contract," he said. "Yeah, I know. That's why I'm asking. It's just waterfront and back. 90 minutes, maybe less. I already cleared it with scheduling." Crane was already looking at his tablet, already checking boxes in his head. "I can authorize the overtime." Mason thought about the camera angles he'd filed a report on. He thought about Hunter Cole's expression in the conference room. He thought about the shape of 3 blind spots arranged like a design. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, Shah." The convoy was 3 vehicles, lead SUV, Hunter, and 2 of his senior team. Middle vehicle. A black sedan carrying Amelia and her personal aide, a woman named Clara, who was quiet and efficient and carried a messenger bag that probably weighed 15 pounds, given how many tablets and folders it contained. Rear vehicle, Mason driving, one of Hunter's junior security guys named Torres riding along. Mason had driven motorcades before, years ago, in circumstances that were not something he talked about. He knew what a properly run protection convoy felt like from the inside. The rhythm of it, the communication cadence, the way vehicles maintained their spacing, and the lead car's positioning relative to possible threat angles. This one felt off almost immediately, not dramatically, nothing anyone would point to from the outside. But the spacing between the lead vehicle and Amelia's sedan was wider than protocol, 6 car lengths instead of 4. The radio check at departure had been clipped, faster than it should have been, like someone was trying to get through the procedure rather than actually run it. And the route they were taking, Mason had the map on his phone, had looked it up before departure out of habit, was not the most direct path to the waterfront location. It wasn't a big deviation, maybe 8 minutes longer. A different set of surface streets that looped through a section of the old industrial port district before rejoining the main waterfront road. "Hey," he said to Torres. "Route says we're going through the old port stretch." Torres was looking at his phone. He glanced up. "Yeah, it's the standard security alternate. Avoid the traffic on Alaskan Way." "Traffic's fine on Alaskan tonight. I checked before we left." Torres shrugged. "Hunter sets the route." Mason watched the lead vehicle ahead of them. He watched how it moved. He looked at Torres, not suspicious, not alarmed, but watching. Torres seemed genuinely uninterested, the way people seem when they've been told what to believe and have no reason to think otherwise. Mason picked up his radio handset. "Rear vehicle to lead, checking signal. Any issue with communication tonight?" Static. Then, "Signal's fine, rear." "Here." Hunter's voice smooth. "Sit tight." The signal sounded fine, but Mason had spent years in environments where signal problems were manufactured, not discovered, and there was a specific quality to the audio, a compression, a slight flatness, that suggested the channel had been rerouted through something. He couldn't prove it. He noted it. They crossed into the port district. The streets here were wide and mostly empty. Commercial warehousing, a couple of decommissioned loading facilities, the kind of urban geography that accumulated when an industrial economy shifted and left its skeleton behind. The streetlights were sparse. The traffic disappeared. Mason's hands were relaxed on the wheel. Externally. Internally, something he hadn't felt in years was waking up. Not fear exactly, but the specific heightened attention that used to come on during insertion, when the landscape changed and the information you had going in stopped matching what you could see in front of you. He watched the lead vehicle slow, watched it signal and turn left, into what the map showed as a service road running along a row of closed warehouse buildings. "That's not the waterfront route," Mason said. "Must be a traffic adjustment," Torres said, but he didn't sound certain anymore. Mason turned to follow the lead vehicle. He watched the middle sedan follow it too. 3 vehicles, now moving single file into a service lane with no other traffic, no lighting except what the headlights threw forward, no civilians in any direction. His radio crackled. "Lead to convoy. Minor detour. Stand by." A detour. Into a dead industrial block at 7:30 in the evening. Mason said nothing. He followed. He checked his mirrors, nothing behind them, and he began very quietly cataloging exits. The service lane ran about 400 meters before it opened into what looked like a staging area for one of the warehouse buildings. There was a large structure on the left, loading bays, most of them shuttered, a fence line on the right. Ahead, the lane terminated in a wide, flat expanse of cracked concrete. The lead vehicle stopped. The middle sedan stopped. Mason stopped the rear vehicle and put it in park and said to Torres, very calmly, "Get on the radio. Get me a secondary channel to dispatch." Torres looked at him. "Why?" "Because I want a secondary channel. Right now." "I don't—" Torres reached for his radio, clicked it. Static. Clicked to another channel. Static. His face changed. "I'm not getting anything. Try your phone." Torres picked up his phone, looked at it. No signal. Mason was already looking ahead at the lead vehicle. Its doors were opening. Hunter Cole stepped out. Two others with him, moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with a traffic adjustment. The door of the middle sedan opened and Clara started to get out, probably because she'd been told to, or because things were happening and she didn't understand them. And one of Hunter's men put a hand on her shoulder and said something Mason couldn't hear, and Clara stopped moving and stood very still. Amelia was getting out of the other side of the sedan. Mason's door was already open. He moved without deliberating about it. That was the thing about the training. It didn't make you fearless. It made the calculation so fast that it happened below conscious thought. He was around the front of the rear vehicle before Torres had processed what was happening, and he was covering the distance between his position and the middle sedan at a pace that wasn't running but was faster than walking, threading between the vehicles in a way that kept metal between him and Hunter's team as long as possible. Amelia had come around the side of the sedan and was standing in the open, her coat on, looking at Hunter with an expression that was trying to be composed and wasn't quite making it. "Hunter, what is this?" Her voice was level. She was doing that thing, the professional armor, the performance of control. But Mason could hear the seams in it. "What are we doing here?" "Small change of venue," Hunter said. His voice had dropped the particular quality it had in Orion's hallways. The deference. The professional efficiency. He sounded different now. More like himself. "We'll explain inside." "Explain what? We had a dinner." "Amelia." He said her name without the title she was used to. That landed. He watched it land on her and didn't soften it. "Inside." "Hunter, I'm asking you." "Mason Reed." Hunter had spotted him. He said it without surprise, which told Mason that Hunter had known he was in the rear vehicle. Had factored it in. "You need to stay with the car." "I'd rather not," Mason said. He'd stopped about 12 feet from Amelia's position. He wasn't looking at Hunter. He was reading the two men flanking him, reading their hands, reading their stances. Professional. Former security, probably. Not nervous. The third man, the one with Clara, was further back and wasn't watching Mason, which meant he didn't consider Mason a significant variable. That was useful information. "This is not your situation," Hunter said to him. "Back to the vehicle." "What situation is it?" Mason asked. He genuinely kept his voice conversational, not challenging, just asking. "Because we just ran a convoy into a dead block with no communication and no traffic reason for the deviation, which is either a significant protocol failure or something else, and I'm trying to figure out which." Hunter looked at him for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. A small loosening. The kind that happens when someone stops maintaining a performance they no longer need. "You're smarter than you look," Hunter said. "Too bad." Then he looked at his two men and nodded, and everything got complicated very fast. What happened in the next 40 seconds was not clean. It was not smooth. It did not look like a movie sequence. One of Hunter's men moved toward Mason with the direct efficiency of someone who'd done this before and expected it to be finished in 3 or 4 seconds. He was not small, and he was not slow, and he was professionally confident. Mason broke his wrist. Not intentionally, or more precisely, not as an objective. He was intercepting a grab, redirected into a joint lock, and the other man's momentum did the rest. The sound was bad. The man went down making a noise that had nothing dignified in it. The second man had a different approach, more cautious, reading what he'd just seen, adjusting. Mason had less than a second, and he used it to put himself between that man and Amelia, which meant he was taking the engagement on the wrong side, back toward the sedan, but it also meant Amelia had metal behind her and cover on her right. "Get to the car," he said to her. Not a shout, direct. She didn't move immediately. He could feel her standing there, the paralysis of a situation that had completely overwritten her operational framework for the world, and he didn't have time to manage it. "Amelia." Get in the car, right now. She moved. The second man was good. He got inside Mason's guard twice, and the second time it cost Mason a forearm across the side of his face that rang his ears and made the concrete seem to tilt slightly. He absorbed it, stayed upright, used the grab to redirect, put the man into the side of the sedan hard enough to cave the door panel. Then he was moving, around the car, Amelia's door, and she was already half in because somewhere in the last 12 seconds, her instincts had overridden the paralysis, and she'd made a decision. He got in behind her, hit the locks. The keys were in it. Clara had been the one in the driver's position originally, which was its own oddity, but the key was there and the engine was running. He looked in the mirror. Hunter was not coming toward the car. He was standing back, watching, with an expression that was more calculating than angry. That was worse, Mason thought, than if he'd been angry. He put the car in reverse. They got 2 blocks before Amelia spoke. Clara. Her voice was tight. They still have Clara. Clara's not in danger, Mason said. He was navigating the service lane in reverse, watching the mirror. They need her to make the meeting look routine if anyone checks. They'll hold her, not hurt her. She'll be released once. You don't know that. No, he said. I don't. He reached the service lane entrance and swung the car around onto the street. The compass in his head was already orienting. Nearest populated area, nearest working cell signal, nearest anything. But Clara is alive, and here with me is where the danger is. He found a main road. The signal on Amelia's phone came back before his did, and she got it out with shaking hands and almost dropped it and caught it, and he watched her pull it together through sheer force of will, which impressed him more than he would have said. I'm calling the police, she said. Yeah, do that. She looked at him. He was driving, watching the mirrors, hands steady. She looked at his hands, at his face. The side of his face where the blow had landed was going to be ugly tomorrow, but he hadn't mentioned it, and his expression was the same level, focused quality it had been in her conference room 5 days ago when he was telling her about a junction fault. You broke someone's wrist, she said, redirected a joint under pressure. He contributed to the outcome. That's a very clinical way to put it. Would you prefer a different way? She looked back at her phone and dialed. He drove. The police response came in 11 minutes, which was fast for the district, which meant either they'd caught a break on timing or someone in the city's emergency network had flagged Orion Systems as a priority contact. Amelia suspected the latter. She had relationships she rarely thought about until she needed them. They pulled into the lot of a freight office 3 blocks from the Port District's edge, lit and visible from the road, and Mason cut the engine and they waited. Amelia was on her second call, her CFO, brief and terse, because she didn't yet know exactly what she was dealing with, but she knew enough to start activating her second tier of information. Mason was outside the car, leaning against the passenger side, watching the street. She got out and stood beside him. The night was cold. The waterfront smell was salt and diesel and something chemical from the freight operation behind them. Not the sanitized corporate smell of the building she'd been inside for most of the past year. You were already watching, she said, in the convoy, before anything happened. He didn't say anything immediately. I saw your eyes, she said. When we turned into that lane, you already knew. He looked at the street for a moment. I suspected. Since when? Few days. She turned to look at him directly. You filed maintenance reports on camera housings. Orientation corrections, yeah. Those were intentional, she said. Not a question. I thought they might be. She was quiet. Then, and you didn't come to me with that. I tried the ticket system, he said. He said it without accusation, without the edge she might have deserved. And I'd already had the one conversation with you that I'd had, and that one went. He paused. It went how it went. She didn't look away. She absorbed that. She let it sit exactly as heavy as it was. I laughed at you, she said, in front of 16 people. He said it factually, not to wound. Yeah. Somewhere 2 streets over, a siren started up. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her then. He took a moment before he answered, and it wasn't a dramatic pause. It was just a man choosing words carefully because he didn't have a prepared version of this conversation. I know, he said. Blue lights turned the corner. He straightened up, stepped away from the car, and raised one hand so the officers pulling in could see him clearly. Hands visible, posture open, everything above board, nothing to interpret wrong. She watched him do it with the practiced ease of a man who understood exactly how he looked to other people and was managing the information environment without being asked to. She thought about what she'd said in the conference room. Men like him belonged in the past. The police car pulled up, and the officers were out fast, and Mason was already talking. Calm, direct, sequential, exactly the kind of information a responder needed in exactly the order they needed it. And Amelia stood 3 feet behind him and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific cold clarity of having been completely wrong about something. Not the small wrong of a miscalculation or an overestimate. The other kind. The kind that required you to look at yourself squarely and understand that your error had a shape, and the shape of it was a quiet man in a gray jacket holding a toolkit in a doorway, telling you something true that you had chosen not to hear. The officers were asking her questions now. She answered them. She was still good at that, composing herself, delivering information, managing a situation. That hadn't changed. But the ground under it had shifted, and she could feel the difference. The way you can always feel the difference between standing on solid footing and standing on something that's had its foundation quietly rearranged while you weren't paying attention. Hunter Cole's vehicles were gone by the time the first patrol units reached the service lane. The staging area was empty. Clara was sitting on a concrete barrier with her messenger bag in her lap, and her hands folded and her face very still, the way a person's face gets when they've been frightened badly and have chosen to process it later rather than now. She was unharmed. Mason had been right about that too. It took 3 hours to complete the initial police report. A detective arrived around 9:30 and asked better questions. Amelia gave everything she had, which at this point was a first-hand account of the convoy deviation, 2 men who could be identified from Orion's own personnel records, and the knowledge, settling in her stomach like cold water, that Hunter Cole had been running her security operation for almost 2 years. 2 years of access. 2 years of positioning, 2 years of knowing exactly where she was and who was around her and what she trusted. She sat in the detective's temporary interview space, a freight office break room with a table and 4 chairs and a coffee maker that had seen better years. And she felt the scope of it expanding the more she thought about it. Not just Hunter. Hunter was executing something, not designing it. There was a structure behind this, someone who wanted something specific from her, who had the patience and the resources to spend 2 years building toward it. She knew, without yet having the evidence to confirm it, who that was. Xavier Voss had been circling Orion Systems for 18 months, a corporate rival with deep pockets and a longer memory than most. He'd made one public offer for acquisition. She'd declined it in a board meeting with language that she suspected had embarrassed him. He'd gone quiet after that. She'd interpreted the quiet as acceptance. She was revising that interpretation now. Mason was in the room adjacent. She could hear him talking through the partition, patient, clear, exactly accurate. I was describing the convoy vehicles, the radio anomaly, the specific technique used on the man whose wrist he'd broken, all of it in the measured, sequential language of someone who had given official statements before. The detective interviewing her noted the direction of her attention. "The driver," the detective said. "How well do you know him?" "Not well," she said. "He worked for you long?" 3 weeks. The detective wrote something, and he flagged the security issues before tonight. "He tried to." Another note. "And tonight he came back," she said. She said it simply because it was a simple fact. He didn't have to. He was already out of the situation. He came back. The detective looked at her, waited to see if there was more. There wasn't, because she was still working out what exactly that meant. The full weight of it, the specific thing it said about the difference between what she had built and what she had missed, and the particular kind of man who notices a faulty junction light at 7 in the morning because he's paying attention to the things that actually matter, not the things that look good on a security audit. Outside, rain had started on the Seattle streets. The freight office windows were streaked with it. Somewhere out there, Hunter Cole was running whatever his plan had called for next. And Amelia Sterling was sitting in a break room with bad coffee, understanding for the first time in a long time that the most important thing in any system, the thing that couldn't be purchased or optimized or automated, was the character of the people inside it. She'd been selling security for 7 years. Tonight was the first time she'd actually needed it. The detective's name was Okafor. She was mid-40s, wore a rain jacket that had been waterproofed once and wasn't anymore, and she had the specific quality of stillness that came from spending years in rooms where people were lying to her and learning to wait them out. She wasn't waiting Amelia out. She believed the account, or at least believed enough of it to keep asking the right questions. But the stillness was there anyway, ambient, the way some people carry their professional history in their posture. She came back into the break room around 11 with 2 coffees she'd found somewhere and set one in front of Amelia without asking. "Your driver," she said. "He's not my driver," Amelia said. Then, "He's a contractor, transport and maintenance." "Right." Okafor sat. "Former Navy SEAL." "Yes." "You knew that going in tonight?" "I knew it from his personnel file. I didn't know it the way—" She stopped. Tried again. "I knew it as a fact. I didn't know what it meant." Okafor nodded slowly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "He gave us a good statement. Clear, sequenced, no overstatement. Guys with that background, they either give you too much or just enough. He gave us just enough." Amelia didn't say anything. "He also flagged 3 camera anomalies in a maintenance report 2 days ago," Okafor said. "I pulled it from the facility's ticket system. Report sitting in a queue. Nobody actioned it." "I know. Your security chief would have had access to that queue." "I know," Amelia said again. Okafor looked at her, not unkindly. "How long has Hunter Cole been running your security operation?" 22 months. "And in that time, any other things that didn't quite add up?" In retrospect, Amelia thought about that honestly, the way she was starting to think about a lot of things tonight, without the professional filter, without the instinct to process information in terms of what it meant for the company's position, just honestly. "There were decisions I let him make without enough oversight. Route planning, access credentialing, vendor sourcing for some of the technical systems." She paused. "I trusted him because he was competent, because nothing had gone wrong." "Nothing you knew about." "Nothing I knew about," she agreed. Okafor made a note, then she looked up. "Xavier Voss, you mentioned the name. He's made moves on Orion before, an acquisition attempt 18 months ago that I declined. Since then, quiet." "Too quiet?" "I interpreted it as him moving on to other targets. That appears to have been incorrect. We'll need everything you have on him. Prior communications, the acquisition proposal, any indirect contact since." Okafor closed her notepad. "Tonight was a containment move. They weren't trying to hurt you. They were trying to sideline you long enough to make a board move, get you out of the operational picture, insert someone sympathetic to Voss's position, run the numbers on a forced acquisition from the inside." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she'd say anything else. "That's white-collar criminal conspiracy, minimum, federal jurisdiction likely, given the scope." "I understand. You're going to want your own legal team engaged by morning." "They'll be engaged within the hour." Okafor almost smiled. "I figured." She stood. "We're going to need you available. Not in your office, not in your apartment. Somewhere your location isn't known to anyone connected to Cole or Voss." Amelia looked at her. "Tonight," Okafor said. "I mean, tonight." Mason was in the corridor when she came out of the break room. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, not on his phone, not doing anything except waiting. The side of his face was darkening, a bruise spreading from his cheekbone down toward his jaw that looked considerably worse under the freight office's fluorescent lighting than it probably had in the dark of the port district. He straightened when he saw her. "They're done with you?" she asked. "For tonight." She looked at his face. "You need that looked at. It's a bruise. You could have a fracture." "I'd know if I had a fracture." She wanted to argue with that on principle, but he said it with the flat confidence of someone who'd had a fracture before and knew what it felt like, which she suspected was probably true, so she let it go. "Detective Okafor says I need to be somewhere other than my known locations tonight," she said. He nodded. "That's right." "I don't—" She stopped. The sentence she'd started was, "I don't have somewhere like that," and saying it out loud made real something she'd been managing around the edges of all evening. That the infrastructure of her life, her apartment building with its security system, her office with its access protocols, her driver with his routing knowledge, all of it ran through Orion systems. All of it touched Hunter Cole's fingerprint somewhere in the chain. "My daughter's with a neighbor tonight," Mason said. "She does sleepovers there sometimes. I'll call and tell her it's running late." He said it simply. I have a place in Tacoma. It's not, it's small, but it's not connected to anything with your name on it. She looked at him. I'm not trying to. He stopped and seemed briefly, genuinely uncomfortable, which was the first time she'd seen him look anything other than level. I'm just saying it's an option. Okafor can note the address. Your people can know it. It's not. I'm not trying to make this something it isn't. I know, she said. He nodded, still slightly stiff with it. Okay, she said. Thank you. The drive to Tacoma took 40 minutes. They took a vehicle from the police lot, one of the department's unmarked civilian pool cars, Okafor's arrangement, which Amelia suspected involved a favor being called in. Mason drove. Amelia sat in the passenger seat and watched the highway unfold in the headlights and said very little because there wasn't much to say yet, and she was too tired to fill silence artificially. Around the halfway point, she asked, "What was your daughter's name?" "Lily." "How old?" "8. A pause, rain on the windshield, wipers on low. "What does she think you do?" Amelia asked. "Fix things," Mason said. "Buildings, cars. She's seen me with my toolbox enough times that it's just what Dad does." "Does she know about the other part?" He was quiet for a moment. "She knows I was in the military. She knows I was gone a lot when she was very little. She doesn't know the details." He glanced in the mirror out of habit, then back to the road. "She doesn't need to. She's 8. "Will you ever tell her?" "Parts of it. When she's older and asks. Some things you tell your kids and some things you carry so they don't have to." Amelia thought about that for a while. "Her mother?" she asked. "Not in the picture." He said it without particular bitterness. "Clean, the way you say something you've made peace with even if the making wasn't easy." Lily was 2. It wasn't a good situation, and then it was over, and Lily doesn't remember it, which is the best outcome available. She didn't push it. She looked at the rain on the glass. "I've never lived anywhere small," she said, not sure why she said it. "What?" "You said your place was small. I went from my parents' house to a dorm to a series of apartments that got progressively larger as the company grew. I've been in my current apartment for 4 years, and I've never cooked a meal there." He glanced at her. "Never?" "There's a kitchen. I believe there's a stove. I've used the coffee maker." Something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Lily would find that bewildering. She'd be right to. The house in Tacoma was small the way he'd said. A 2-bedroom craftsman on a block of similar houses, a narrow front porch, a yard that was more honest than decorative. Inside it was clean in the functional way of a place maintained by someone who didn't have extra time but didn't let things go either. There were drawings on the refrigerator held up by magnets. Lily's, obviously, a horse that might also have been a dog, and a figure labeled Dad in large, careful letters that had the specific charm of a child who was still learning that the letters needed to stay roughly the same size. Mason turned on the kitchen light and put a kettle on without asking if she wanted tea, which she appreciated because she did, but would have said no if offered. She sat at the kitchen table. The same table, she realized, where he'd sat 3 nights ago thinking about the shape of 3 blind spots in a surveillance grid. "Tell me what you know about Voss," she said. He was at the counter, getting mugs. He turned. "What I know from where?" "From working in my building for 3 weeks. From whatever else." He thought about it. He came and set a mug in front of her and sat across the table. "Voss has a private security consulting firm that's basically a talent pipeline, ex-military, ex-law enforcement, placed into corporate and personal security roles. Not unusual. Lots of firms do that. But his has a specific pattern where the placements tend to cluster around acquisition targets. Companies he's interested in buying start turning up with Voss-connected security personnel." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I read," he said. Not defensively. "I spent 12 years doing threat assessment as part of my job. Reading organizational patterns is just, I still do it. I can't turn it off." "Hunter Cole came through Voss's network?" "I don't know for certain, but the firm that placed him with Orion, I looked it up when I pulled the work order assignment last week. It's 3 corporate entities removed from a holding company that Voss has a board position in." She put her hands flat on the table. "You looked that up last week." "I had the time. I was doing a generator check." "Mason?" She stopped. "Why didn't you come to me with this?" He looked at her steadily. What would you have done with it? The question sat there. She didn't answer it immediately because the honest answer was complicated, and she was starting to understand that he appreciated honest answers over fast ones. I don't know, she said finally. A week ago I might have flagged it to Hunter. Right, he said. She closed her eyes for a second, opened them. The Lily-made horse dog on the refrigerator was visible from where she sat. What else? They talked for 2 hours. Not smoothly. There were stops and starts, moments where she had to absorb something before she could ask the next question, moments where he was working through his own analysis out loud and catching himself at the edges of what he actually knew versus what he suspected. He was careful about that distinction. She noticed he was careful about it and made a mental note about what that meant. The picture that assembled itself over those 2 hours was this. Xavier Voss had been operating a long, patient campaign against Orion Systems since the failed acquisition. He hadn't abandoned the effort. He'd simply moved it underground. Hunter Cole was either a Voss placement from the beginning or had been flipped sometime in the past year, almost certainly with financial incentives significant enough to override whatever professional loyalty he might have had. The camera anomalies Mason had found were almost certainly Hunter's work. Small adjustments to create consistent surveillance, blind spots in the building's most sensitive circulation routes. Not a hack, not a technical breach. Just a man with the right access making small physical changes that nobody else thought to check. And the convoy tonight hadn't been an improvisation. It had been staged, timed, and prepared. The warehouse district location had been pre-selected. The communication jamming equipment had been placed in advance. This was not Hunter acting alone on a Thursday evening. This was a plan with infrastructure. He had people inside waiting at the warehouse, Mason said. He was on his second cup of tea. She was on her first, and it had gone cold. The 2 men at the convoy were containment, meant to manage the immediate situation. The main event was going to be inside that building. What was the main event? A signing. He said it plainly. They would have had documents ready. Transfer of operational authority, framed as a voluntary restructuring, something that could pass board scrutiny if it needed to. With you unavailable for long enough, Voss inserts a friendly board member. The documents get ratified as a crisis response measure, and by the time you resurface, the structural change is already in the company's official record. She thought about her board. 13 members. She knew 11 of them well enough to be confident. The other 2 were recent appointments. One of them recommended through a third-party governance advisory firm that she now needed to look at very carefully. They didn't need you to sign willingly, she said. No, but a signature under duress is harder to contest than no signature at all, especially if the witnesses are all Voss people and the official record shows a voluntary transfer. She sat with that, the full shape of it, the patience it required. 18 months of positioning, 2 years of access through Hunter, the careful accumulation of leverage and structural change and prepared documentation, all of it pointed at a single evening. What do they do when it doesn't work? She asked. Depends on how committed they are. He didn't cushion it. Tonight's plan was clean. No direct physical harm. Nothing that couldn't be walked back if it went wrong. But if Voss decides the operation needs to complete, he stopped. He loses a lot if this falls apart. That's either a reason to cut his losses or a reason to escalate. Which do you think? I think a man who spends 18 months on a plan doesn't walk away from it because the first execution failed. The kitchen was very quiet. Rain still on the roof, softer now. There's something else, Mason said. She looked at him. Your board meeting, the quarterly review. It's Monday. She stared. That's 4 days. If Voss can't get a voluntary transfer, he needs a board move. A no-confidence vote is possible if he has the right members aligned and the right narrative about tonight's events. You disappear for a Thursday evening, security incident, possible criminal investigation into your security apparatus. That's a narrative that could be shaped into leadership instability. He wasn't being dramatic about it. He was just laying it out. Monday is a window. She stood up. She needed to be moving. It was a physical thing, the way her body processed urgency. She walked to the kitchen window, looked out at the dark yard, walked back. I need to get into Orion's systems, she said. My own systems. There are records Hunter would have touched, access logs, routing data, the vendor sourcing history. If there's a documented trail connecting him to Voss's network, I need it before Monday. Your access credentials still work? They should. He'd need a board vote to suspend CEO access, which he doesn't have. He has physical access to the server infrastructure. He could do damage without a board vote. Then we need to move fast. She looked at him directly. Can you get us back into the building? He thought about it. She watched him think about it. Not performing deliberation, actually doing it. Working through what he knew about the building's physical layout, the service access points, the likely changes Hunter would have made to lock down his own tracks. The loading entrance, he said. Contractor badge access runs on a separate credentialing system from the main security network. Different vendor, different maintenance contract. Hunter managed the main system. He might not have had the access or the time to lock down the contractor network. Might not have. Yeah, he said. Might not have. He met her eyes. I said I wasn't going to pretend I have guarantees. She almost smiled. It was a small, tired thing, barely there. Fair enough. They left Tacoma at 2 in the morning. Mason had called the neighbor, a woman named Ruth who watched Lily sometimes, decent people, the kind of neighborhood relationship that was built over years of small mutual reliabilities. And Ruth had said it was fine, Lily was asleep, take whatever time was needed. Mason had thanked her with the specific sincerity of a person who understood the value of what they were being given. He drove. Amelia was on her phone in the passenger seat, pulling up what remote access she had to Orion's administrative systems. Some of it was available through a secure mobile interface, limited but functional. She was already building the access trail she'd need to show the board. Her own activity logs, time-stamped and authenticated, demonstrating that she had remained the active operational executive through the crisis. She was also texting Clara. Clara had been released from the scene around midnight, transported by officers, her immediate statement taken. She was home and responding in the clipped, efficient way that Amelia recognized as Clara's processing mode. Scared but functional, already thinking about what needed doing next. Board contact list. Separate from any Orion system communication channel. Text only. Clara responded in 3 minutes with a list of 11 numbers. 11 of the 13. The 2 she'd omitted were the 2 recent appointments. Amelia stared at that omission for a moment. Clara had made the same calculation without being asked. That said something about how visible the problem had been, to someone paying attention. She forwarded the list to Detective Okafor with a brief note. The city came back around them as they got closer. Lights, traffic even at this hour. The particular texture of Seattle at 2 a.m., which was quieter than most cities but never entirely empty. Mason turned off the highway and took the surface streets toward the Orion building's back approach. He cut his headlights a block out and navigated by street lighting alone, which she noted without comment. He pulled into the service alley behind the adjacent property, not the Orion lot, not directly, and parked where the vehicle was visible from the building but not from the street. Stay behind me, he said. I know the building better than you do. You know the floor plan better than I do, he said. That's different from what I said. She considered arguing with that. She didn't. Fine. They went in through the loading entrance. His contractor badge, the separate system, the one Hunter hadn't managed, red-green. The door opened. They were in. The building at 2:30 in the morning was a different place from the building during business hours. The HVAC ran quieter. The corridors were dim on automatic economy lighting, and the particular corporate confidence of the place. The brushed steel, the calibrated cool, the hum of a system that believed in itself, receded into something that felt more like what it actually was, walls and wiring and data, indifferent to who owned it. They took the service stairs. No elevator. Elevators logged access, and even if Hunter's ability to monitor in real time was compromised, the logs would be there later. Mason moved differently in here than he moved during working hours. She noticed it on the second-floor landing. Something tighter, more economical, the way a person moves when they're reading an environment rather than just passing through it. He paused at each landing, listened, moved again. He wasn't dramatic about it. He wasn't performing caution. He was just actually cautious, in the specific way that people are cautious when caution is a skill rather than a feeling. The server room was on the 4th floor, in a climate-controlled suite behind a standard access door. Amelia's credentials opened it. She felt the small relief of that, the system recognizing her, the door releasing. And they were inside. The room was cool and loud in the specific way of server rooms. The constant mechanical respiration of cooling fans, the blink of status lights in rows. She went to the administrative terminal in the corner, a dedicated unit connected to the building's internal network, and she logged in. Her access was intact. She exhaled once, quietly, and started pulling records. Mason was at the door, watching the corridor through the small window, not hovering over her, not asking for updates. Just holding the perimeter, which was the right thing to do, and she hadn't needed to ask for it. She worked fast. Hunter's access logs first. Every time his credentials had touched the system, every file accessed, every modification made. She was looking for the pattern of a man who had been quietly preparing, accessing things that weren't his operational responsibility, building a picture of internal data that he had no legitimate reason to need. It took her 20 minutes to find the first thread and follow it. Hunter had accessed board member communication logs, not the content, but the metadata. Who contacted whom, when, frequency. For 6 months, she tracked the access timestamp and cross-referenced it with Voss's known corporate activity timeline and found what she was looking for. Hunter's metadata harvesting intensified sharply in the 2 weeks before each of Voss's 2 previous acquisition attempts on other companies. He'd been giving Voss intelligence on Orion's board communication structure. She started downloading, encrypted archive, her personal credentials, time-stamped authentication. "How long do you need?" Mason asked from the door. 15 more minutes. "We have 10, he said. "Night security does a physical circuit. I've watched the pattern. They're due on this floor in about 12 minutes. She typed faster. She pulled the vendor sourcing files for the past 2 years, specifically the security contractor records, the hiring pipeline documentation for Hunter's team. She was looking for the corporate thread Mason had traced, the 3-entity chain connecting the placement firm to Voss's holding company. She found it in the original RFP documentation for Hunter's hire, a consultant recommendation that nobody had questioned because the recommendation came through a legitimate governance channel. Except the governance channel was a firm that Voss had an indirect financial relationship with, buried 3 layers down in a corporate structure that was designed to make exactly that kind of connection hard to find. She found the board member, too. One of the 2 recent appointments, a man named Garrett Foss, brought in 8 months ago through a governance advisory recommendation. She pulled his appointment documentation and found the same consultant fingerprint, different surface entity, same underlying network. "Got it," she said. "Time to move," Mason said. She pulled the drive, a portable encrypted unit she'd grabbed from her desk on the way through, one of the things she kept there for exactly the kind of catastrophic contingency she'd always told herself she was prepared for and had never actually expected to need. The archive was on it. 22 minutes of documentation that was probably not enough to be conclusive on its own, but was enough to give Okafor's team a thread to pull, and enough to give her legal team a framework, and enough to walk into a board meeting on Monday and put something on the table that changed the shape of the conversation. They were out of the server room and into the stairwell before the night security guard reached the 4th floor landing from the other direction. They were back in this car at 3:15. Amelia held the drive in both hands in her lap. She was aware of how much was on it, and aware of how many more steps remained between here and the outcome she needed, and aware that none of it was certain. Mason started the engine. "The board member," she said, "Garrett Foss. He was placed 8 months ago. He's been in 4 meetings where security infrastructure budget was discussed." "Yeah." "He voted against 2 security improvement proposals, ones that would have upgraded the credentialing system to the kind that covers contractor access." She looked at the drive. "Hunter couldn't have gotten us in tonight if those upgrades had gone through, which means Foss was voting against his own exposure." "Without knowing that's what he was doing," Mason said, "he would have been given a business rationale." "Voss's people are good at business rationales." "They had 2 years to be." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You built most of this picture in 3 weeks." "I had some starting points. You had a maintenance work order and a faulty junction box." He pulled out of the alley and onto the street, headlights back on. He didn't say anything. "I said something to you," she said, "in that conference room, about men like you belonging in the past. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She looked at him directly. He was watching the road. "I'm saying it because it was wrong. Not just unkind, wrong. I was wrong about what the past you came from meant, and I was wrong about what it made you capable of, and I was performing something for that room that I'm not proud of." She stopped. "I'm sorry. That's what I'm saying." He drove for a few seconds. "I heard you the first time," he said, "when you said it at the freight office." "I know. I'm saying it again because once didn't feel like enough." He glanced at her briefly, then back to the road. "Okay," he said, not "it's fine" or "don't worry about it" or any of the social formulas that would have closed the subject and let them both move on without actually sitting in it. Just, "Okay. Received, acknowledged. I'll let that be what it is." She found that she could breathe a little easier after that. The city moved past them, wet streets reflecting the lights. The hour passed the point where most of Seattle was awake, and not yet to the point where the early risers had started. That in-between dark that belonged to night shift workers and insomniacs, and people who'd had the kind of evening that rewrote the way they understood certain things. Amelia looked at the drive in her hands, then out at the street, then at the man driving her through a city she'd built a company in and understood less than she'd thought. There was a long way still to go. Monday was 4 days out. Okafor's investigation was in its first hours. The full extent of what Voss had prepared was still unknown. But she had the thread, she had the documentation. She had someone next to her who'd walked back into a bad situation because walking away from it wasn't something he was built to do. She held on to that. For now, it was enough to move on. They got back to Tacoma at 4 in the morning. Mason checked on Lily first, quietly, the way parents check on sleeping children, just standing in the doorway for a moment with the hall light off, making sure the shape under the blanket was breathing and still. She was. She had one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress, and her hair was everywhere, and she was making a small sound that wasn't quite snoring but was in the neighborhood. He pulled her arm back onto the bed without waking her and eased the door shut. Amelia was in the kitchen when he came back down. She had her laptop open. She'd retrieved it from the car along with a bag Clara had brought to the freight office earlier in the evening, some overnight essentials assembled with Clara's characteristic foresight. And she was working through email in a focused silence that suggested she'd found her operational footing again. He put the kettle on again. "You should sleep," he said. "Later." She didn't look up. "I need to brief Marcus before 6. Marcus Hale was Orion's general counsel. She'd mentioned him twice in the car, the kind of mentions that made clear he was one of the people she actually trusted, which was a shorter list than her org chart suggested. He needs the full picture before he can start building the legal framework. If Voss moves on the board before Monday, I need Marcus already 3 steps ahead of whatever they file." Mason poured water and didn't argue with her. He sat at the table with his own cup and picked up his phone and started going through the notes he'd been accumulating. Mental architecture made physical, things he'd been holding in his head since the past week that now needed to be organized into something Okafor's team could actually use. They worked in parallel at the kitchen table in the 4 a.m. quiet, which should have been strange and wasn't, which was its own kind of strange. Around 5, she looked up. "Your face is worse," she said. He touched the bruise experimentally. It was. "Bruises do that. You're certain nothing's fractured. The cheekbone's solid. If it were cracked, I'd have more swelling and the pain pattern would be different." He said it without drama, like describing weather. "I've had a cracked cheekbone. This isn't that." She looked at him for a moment. "When?" "Kandahar, 2009. He picked up his cup. "Different circumstances." She wanted to ask about the circumstances and knew enough to understand that wasn't an invitation to ask. She went back to her laptop. Then after a few seconds she said, without looking up, "Do you miss it?" He thought about it genuinely, the way she'd come to recognize as his default, with questions that deserved a real answer. Some of it, the clarity. When you're operating, everything unnecessary falls away. The only thing that matters is the mission and the people next to you. He turned his cup slowly. But clarity you pay for with everything else. Your kid grows up while you're deployed. You miss things you can't get back. And some of the things you do, even when they're necessary, they don't leave clean. She was quiet. He hadn't said that to generate sympathy, and she didn't offer any. She just received it, which was the right response. "The people next to you," she said. "Was that the hardest part? Leaving that?" He looked at the table for a moment. "There was a man named Reyes, served with me for 6 years. Best operator I ever worked with. And I mean that technically, not sentimentally. He read situations the way some people read books, fast and completely. He stopped. He didn't come back from the last one I was on, and I did. And I spent about 18 months after that not entirely understanding why that was the arrangement. He looked up at her. Lily helped with that, not because she fixed anything, because she needed someone to show up every day regardless of how the math felt. Amelia held his gaze. There was something in her face, not pity, not the professional sympathy of a person managing a subordinate's disclosure. Something more direct than that, like she was actually seeing him and understood that he'd shown her something real and was treating it accordingly. "I'm sorry about Reyes," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." Marcus Hale arrived at the Tacoma house at 6:45 in a car that had been arranged through a law firm associate rather than any Orion system. He was 61, heavyset, wore the permanent expression of a man who had spent 4 decades being handed problems at inconvenient hours and had stopped being surprised by it. He shook Mason's hand when introduced, sized him up in about 4 seconds in the specific way that experienced lawyers sized up witnesses, and then sat at the kitchen table and opened his briefcase and got to work. The three of them went through the encrypted archive for 2 hours. Marcus asked good questions. He asked them without preamble, without softening, and when the answer to one led somewhere he hadn't anticipated, he adjusted his line of inquiry without comment. He reminded Mason of certain officers he'd served under, the ones who were valuable, not because they were inspirational, but because they processed information fast and accurately and didn't let their ego interfere with the picture. At 8:30, Marcus set down his pen and looked at the material spread across the table, printed documents, his own notes, the structural diagram he'd built on a legal pad mapping the corporate connections between Voss and Hunter's hiring chain. "It's enough to take to the board," he said. "It's not enough to guarantee what the board does with it." "What's the variable?" Amelia asked. "Voss?" Marcus tapped his pen against the legal pad. "If Garrett Voss is as embedded as this suggests, he won't simply absorb the evidence and fold. He'll contest it. Frame it as unverified data assembled by a CEO attempting to deflect from a security failure on her watch. He doesn't need to win the argument. He needs to create enough uncertainty that 2 or 3 board members defer their vote pending an independent review." "Which buys Voss time," Amelia said. "Which is all he needs." Marcus looked at the papers. "We need Voss's direct communication with Voss, not inferred through corporate structure. Actual direct contact." "I couldn't pull communication content from the server room," Amelia said. "Only metadata." "The metadata shows what we have. It suggests a pattern. A good attorney—" Marcus paused, since he was a good attorney and was therefore somewhat talking about himself, "can work with pattern evidence. But Voss will have his own good attorney, and that attorney will correctly point out that indirect structural connection is not proof of instruction." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Lily was still asleep upstairs. The morning had gotten light outside, gray Seattle light through the window over the sink, the kind of flat overcast that could last all day. Mason said, "Hunter knows." Both of them looked at him. "Hunter Cole knows the direct connection," he said. "He was the operational link. Whatever communication he had with Voss directly, or with Voss's intermediaries directly, that's the chain. And right now Hunter is in a position where his plan has failed, he's the subject of a criminal investigation, and he's exposed." Mason turned his cup in his hands. "A man in that position has options. One of them is to keep his mouth shut and hope Voss's resources bail him out. The other is to understand that Voss's resources are going to be directed at protecting Voss, not protecting Hunter." Marcus was looking at him with the expression of a man recalibrating. "You're suggesting Cole might cooperate." "I'm suggesting Cole might be reachable. There's a difference." Mason looked at Amelia. "Okafor's team has him in custody?" "Since last night. They picked up both convoy men and tracked Hunter to a hotel in Bellevue by 2 a.m. Then she has until Monday morning to have a conversation with him." Mason set his cup down. "Hunter's smart enough to know what his situation is. He planned a sophisticated operation for 2 years. That's not an impulsive person. Impulsive people don't weigh their options. They react. Hunter will weigh his options." "And if he decides Voss is the safer bet?" Amelia asked. "Then we go to the board with what we have and we make the argument on the merits." Mason said it without false comfort. "But I think he decides Voss isn't the safer bet, because Voss didn't call last night to check whether Hunter was in custody. He didn't send anyone to verify the situation or offer support. I checked the police report. Hunter was alone in that hotel room. No contact, no legal representation arranged by a third party, nothing. He looked at her directly. Voss cut him loose the moment the operation failed. Hunter just hasn't fully processed that yet. When he does, he'll want a deal, Marcus said. He'll want a deal, Mason agreed. Amelia called Okafor at 9:15. She laid out Mason's reasoning in 4 concise sentences, which was how she communicated things she believed in. The extra words fell away when the logic was solid. Okafor listened without interrupting. When Amelia finished, there was a pause of about 5 seconds. I was already thinking about it, Okafor said. I wanted to let him sit overnight first, give the situation time to clarify in his own head. And I think your contractor is right that Voss went silent. We've been monitoring Cole's known contact channels. Nothing inbound from anyone connected to Voss since 11 last night. Another pause. I'll have a conversation with him this morning. I'm not promising outcomes. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking you to have the conversation. I'll have the conversation. Okafor's voice had that dry quality that wasn't quite humor, but was close to it. Your contractor, Reed, he available if I need a follow-up statement? Amelia looked at Mason across the table. He'd heard enough of the conversation to follow it. He gave a small nod. He's available, she said. After she hung up, Marcus gathered his papers and said he needed 3 hours at his firm to draft the board presentation framework and would have a preliminary version to her by 1 o'clock. He shook Mason's hand again on his way out. Differently this time, Amelia noticed. Less assessment, more acknowledgement. The door closed and the house was quiet again. Lily's footsteps on the ceiling announced that the 8-year-old portion of the household was awake. A pause, then the bathroom, then the footsteps moved toward the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajamas with a pattern of small yellow suns, hair comprehensively disordered, holding a stuffed rabbit that had seen better years. She looked at Mason first, the way children orient to their known point before assessing the unknown. Then she looked at Amelia with the particular frank appraisal of a child who doesn't manage impressions yet. Hi, she said to Amelia. Hi, Amelia said. Are you Dad's friend? A small pause. Yes, Amelia said. From work. Lily considered this. She looked at her father. You said you were going to be late. I was late, Mason said. Very late. Sorry, Bug. Ruth made me eat oatmeal for dinner, Lily said, with the gravity of a person reporting a minor atrocity. Oatmeal is fine. It was the kind with raisins. Raisins are also fine. Lily's gaze moved back to Amelia with that unselfconscious directness children have before they learn to look away. What happened to my dad's face? Lily, Mason started. He got hurt a little, Amelia said. He was helping someone and he got a little hurt. He's okay. Lily looked at the bruise with a focused 8-year-old seriousness. Then she looked at her father. Did you win? Something crossed Mason's face. Yeah, he said. We won. Lily seemed satisfied with this. She pulled herself up into the chair beside him and leaned against his arm and said she wanted eggs, not oatmeal. And Mason started making eggs. And Amelia sat at the kitchen table where she'd spent most of the night dismantling the evidence of a 2-year conspiracy and watched a man who could break someone's wrist without raising his voice carefully scramble 2 eggs for a small girl with sun-patterned pajamas and a rabbit with a worn ear. The distance between those 2 things was not a contradiction, she realized. It was just a complete person. She'd been working with incomplete pictures for a long time. Okafor called back at 11:47. Amelia was in the small living room with her laptop, Marcus's preliminary board framework open in one window, and Orion's financial structure in another, building the argument she'd need to make in 48 hours. Mason was in the kitchen. She could hear him on the phone, checking in with the school about Lily's pickup, apparently, something about a normal Friday that needed to happen regardless of what the rest of the week had been. She answered on the second ring. Cole talked, Okafor said. Amelia was very still. Not everything. He's got a lawyer now. Public defender, which is interesting in itself, suggests Voss didn't send private counsel, which confirms your contractor's read on the situation. Okafor's voice was measured. But he gave us the direct contact chain. There's a man named Breyer who served as the operational intermediary between Cole and Voss. All communication ran through Briar. Separate encrypted channel, regular check-ins, payments through a holding structure Cole can document. That's the direct link, Amelia said. That's the direct link. Cole also confirmed Garrett Foss was recruited through the same intermediary. Different timeline. Foss came in about 14 months ago, after Cole was already positioned. The board appointment was stage 2 of a 3-stage plan. Okafor paused. Stage 3 was Monday. The board meeting. Foss had a no-confidence motion prepared, co-signed by one other member, someone Cole won't name yet, but we have enough to compel disclosure if we need to. Okafor's voice had something in it, not satisfaction, not exactly, but the particular quality of a person who has run a thread to its end and found what they were looking for. Cole gave us Briar's location. We're moving on that this afternoon. Does this give you enough for Voss directly? It gives us enough to file. It gives us enough that his lawyers will start having serious conversations with him about cooperation incentives. A pause. He's not going to walk away from this clean. The question is how much of a fight he puts up on the way down. Amelia thought about Xavier Voss. The acquisition offer he'd made 18 months ago, the specific phrasing of it. Not a business proposal, something with an edge in it. The implication that Orion would benefit from adult supervision. She'd declined it in language that she now recognized had been sharper than necessary, the way her language sometimes got when she felt something she wouldn't name as threatened. Maybe if she'd handled it differently, he goes away and plans a different target. Maybe not. Some people are going to do what they're going to do regardless of how you respond to them, and the error is in thinking your behavior is the variable that controls theirs. Thank you, she said to Okafor, for moving fast on this. Thank your contractor, Okafor said. The read on Cole's situation was accurate. That's not a common skill. After she hung up, she sat for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen doorway. Mason was off the phone, standing at the counter looking at something on his laptop. The same notes he'd been organizing at 4 in the morning. Cole cooperated, she said. Okafor has the direct link to Voss. They're picking up the intermediary this afternoon. He looked up. Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, more like the quiet adjustment of a man who'd done a calculation and found the result within the expected range. Good, he said. You were right about him. I was making a reasonable inference. It could have gone the other way. But it didn't. She leaned against the doorframe. Okafor said to thank you. He looked at her steadily. You don't have to. I'm not thanking you for Okafor, she said. I'm telling you what she said. She paused. I'll do my own thanking separately, in my own time, when I figure out what words are appropriate for someone who spent a week quietly building the case that saved my company while fixing ventilation filters. He almost smiled. It was the same almost smile from the car, the one she'd seen once before. Not a performance, just something that happened briefly and stopped. The filters needed fixing, he said. Friday passed in the specific blur of a crisis being managed from a distance. Marcus delivered the board framework at 1, revised it twice by 5, and by Friday evening had assembled a presentation built on 3 layers of evidence: the server room archive, Cole's disclosed communication chain, and a structural analysis of the corporate connections between Voss, his intermediary Briar, and the board appointments. It was a strong case. Not airtight. Nothing was airtight until a courtroom made it so, but strong enough that 11 of 13 board members presented with this material would have no legitimate reason to side with uncertainty over documented evidence. The 12th, Foss, was the problem they couldn't resolve through evidence alone. He'll contest everything, Marcus said. They were on a video call, his background the late evening clutter of a lawyer who'd been at his desk for 14 hours. His attorney will file for an emergency injunction to delay Monday's meeting pending independent forensic review of the server data. That's a standard play. It buys time, which is what Voss needs. Can they get the injunction? Amelia asked. Depends on the judge, depends on how the filing is framed, depends on things I can't fully predict. Marcus said it without apology. What I can do is have our counterfiling ready before they move. If they file Friday night, we respond Saturday morning. If they file Saturday, we respond same day. We don't give them any window to operate in. What do we need for that? I need the full authentication chain on the server data, timestamp verification, access logs showing your credentials, the chain of custody from extraction to now. I need it in a format that survives forensic scrutiny. Amelia looked at Mason, who was across the room. He'd been listening. I can document the extraction process, he said. I was physically present for every step. Time, method, chain of handling. A contractor's affidavit, Marcus said. He was looking at Mason through the screen with the same recalibrating expression he'd had at the kitchen table. Former special operations, physical presence, contemporaneous notes. That's a strong foundation. It'll be challenged, but it'll hold. He's credible, Amelia said. He's very credible, Marcus agreed, which is why Voss's team will try to make him the issue. Former SEAL turned maintenance contractor working for a CEO who's under pressure. They'll construct a narrative. Let them, Mason said. Both Marcus and Amelia looked at him. Every narrative they build about me is time they're not spending on the actual evidence, he said. And the evidence doesn't change regardless of what they say about where I've been. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been practicing law for 34 years. I want you to know that this is genuinely one of the more coherent strategies I've heard proposed at. He checked his watch. 6:47 on a Friday evening. He closed his notepad. I'll need the affidavit by 10 tomorrow morning. You'll have it by 8, Mason said. Saturday was quieter. The legal machinery was moving. Mason could feel it from the outside the way you feel. Large things moving underground, not directly, but through the behavior of everything adjacent. Marcus's firm was building. Okafor's investigation was generating paperwork. 2 of Voss's corporate entities had already been named in preliminary federal filings that morning, which suggested Okafor had moved on Breyer the previous afternoon and found what she was looking for. Mason wrote his affidavit at the kitchen table while Lily was at a neighbor's birthday party. 2 hours, clear and precise, no editorial, just what he'd seen and done and when. He emailed it to Marcus at 7:43. Amelia had been on calls most of the morning. He could hear the register of her voice changing as the day progressed, the controlled urgency of the early calls giving way to something steadier as each conversation confirmed the ground was holding. She came downstairs at noon and stood in the kitchen doorway with her phone in her hand and the particular expression of a person who has been managing something large and has reached a moment, briefly, where it's managing itself. Voss filed for the injunction this morning, she said. Marcus responded 40 minutes later. The judge has it. We'll know by end of day. And if the judge denies the injunction? Monday happens on schedule. She sat down across from him. If he grants it, then we deal with Monday differently. She nodded. She set her phone face down on the table, which he'd noticed she did when she was willing to actually be in a room rather than managing it from a distance. He'd started reading her tells without trying to. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. When you decided to get out, leave the SEALs. She looked at her hands, then at him. Was it because of Reyes? He thought about it the right way. Not the reflexive deflection, not the clean narrative version. The actual memory, which was more complicated and less linear than any version he'd ever told. It was a lot of things, he said. Reyes was part of it. Lily was part of it. I'd been missing her life in pieces, and I kept telling myself I'd be there for the next thing, and the next thing kept not being next. And there was... He stopped. Started again. There was a mission about 8 months before I got out. Standard parameters on paper. It wasn't standard. Some of what happened, I followed orders and I followed them correctly, and I would make the same operational decisions again. But the outcome had weight to it that didn't leave when the mission was over. You carried it. You carry most of them. That one was heavier than most. He looked at the table. I wasn't broken. I want to be clear about that. I was functional. I was effective. I was fine by the metrics that mattered in that environment. But I looked at what another 5 years looked like, and I looked at Lily's face in a photograph on my phone, and I made a decision about which one I could actually live with. The drive, Amelia said. What? Back from the server room, I asked if you missed it, and you said clarity was something you paid for with everything else. She was watching him carefully. You chose the everything else. Yeah. And then you ended up back in a situation because of a contract job you took to pay the bills. Yeah. He almost smiled again. Life's not very tidy about that. She shook her head slowly. No, it isn't. Outside, the gray sky had shifted, lighter, the cloud cover thinning in the west the way Seattle's weather sometimes surprised you on a Saturday afternoon. Not warm, not clear, but less committed to being dark. Hunter said something, Amelia said. When I was at the convoy, before you got to me. He said, he said I'd built something impressive, but impressive things attract people who know how to take them apart. She paused. He said it like it was my fault, like the vulnerability was in having built something worth taking. He was wrong, Mason said. I know he was wrong. I knew it then, but there was a part of it. She stopped. I've been so focused on building the system that I stopped paying attention to the people inside it. I trusted Hunter because he was technically proficient. I promoted capability over character for 2 years, and I told myself that's what good leadership looked like. She looked at Mason directly. You filed 3 reports through the ticket system. I didn't see them because I delegated the ticket system to the security team, which was Hunter. I know. You should have had a direct channel to me. I was a maintenance contractor, he said. That's not how the org chart works. The org chart should have worked differently. She said it with the particular flatness of a person making a note to themselves, not performing accountability but actually doing it. I'm going to rebuild it, the whole security structure, not just the technical systems, the reporting channels, the oversight structure, the way information moves from the people closest to the problem to the people who can act on it. She looked at him. I'm going to need people who know how to build that, who know what it's supposed to look like when it actually works. He held her gaze. Is that an offer? It's the beginning of a conversation, she said, which I think is more honest than calling it an offer when we're both still in the middle of everything. He nodded slowly. Fair, he said. Her phone buzzed. She turned it over, looked at the screen, and something in her face changed, a sharpening, a settling. She looked up. Marcus, she said. The judge denied the injunction. The room was quiet for a moment. Monday happens on schedule, Mason said. Monday happens on schedule. She held the phone in both hands. I need to call 11 people. Then call them. She was already dialing before she reached the other room, and her voice, when it started, had that specific quality back in it, the one that had carried her through 16 investors and a product demonstration and 4 years of building something from the inside out. Not softened by the last 48 hours. Something else. The same drive, the same precision, but with something added to it, a weight, a groundedness, like a structure that had been tested at its foundations and found out exactly where it was solid and where it needed reinforcement and had started, quietly and without ceremony, to do the work. Mason sat at the kitchen table and finished his coffee and thought about the board meeting 2 days away, and the work that still needed doing, and Lily, at a birthday party 3 blocks over who would need to be picked up at 3 and would want to know if they were having tacos again tonight. He picked up his phone and started reviewing his notes for Monday. The coffee was cold again. He drank it anyway. Sunday was the kind of day that didn't announce itself. Mason woke at 5:30 out of habit, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the dark for 20 minutes before the sky started doing anything with the light. Lily was still asleep. The house made its small sounds. The refrigerator cycling, the heat coming on, the particular creak of the 3rd step that he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months and kept not getting to. Amelia had taken the small bedroom upstairs, his room, which he'd given her without discussion, because it had a door that closed and she needed to be on calls until midnight, and he'd slept on the couch with the particular adaptability of someone who had slept in considerably worse arrangements. She'd come downstairs at 11:30 with her laptop and an apology for the hour. And he'd said the hour was fine, and they'd worked in parallel again until sometime past 1 when she'd finally closed the laptop and gone to bed without announcement. He'd sat for a while after that in the quiet. He was sitting the same way now, in the dark before the day started, and he was thinking about Monday in the specific manner he used to think about operations the night before, not anxiously, not rehearsing outcomes, just holding the shape of it. What he knew, what he didn't know, where the variable was. The variable was still the board. 11 members Amelia trusted. 1 member, Voss, who was Voss's placement and knew the injunction had failed and was now calculating his next move. And 1 unknown member, the cosigner Cole had withheld, who was either genuinely persuadable or already committed and waiting. Marcus had spent Sunday narrowing the unknown. By afternoon, he'd identified the most likely candidate, a board member named Patricia Sloan who had joined Orion's board 14 months ago through the same governance advisory network as Voss. Different surface entity, but traceable to the same underlying structure if you followed it carefully enough. Marcus had followed it carefully enough. Whether Sloan was an active participant in Voss's plan or simply a placement who'd been positioned to be available, he couldn't say for certain. What he could say was that her vote was genuinely in play. Amelia had called Sloan directly on Sunday afternoon. Mason wasn't in the room for that call, but he heard the shape of it from the kitchen. 15 minutes. Amelia's voice controlled and direct. The kind of call where you lay something on the table and let the other person decide what to do with it. When she came back to the kitchen, her face was unreadable in the way faces are when the outcome of something is genuinely uncertain and you're not yet ready to call it. How'd she take it? He asked. She listened, Amelia said. She didn't commit, she said she needed to think. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. She sat down. If Sloan votes with Voss, the motion fails on margin. Not by much, but it fails. If she abstains, same result. I only need her to not actively work against us. What's your read on her? Amelia thought about it. I think she's someone who got involved in something that turned out to be bigger than she understood. I think Voss recruited her on a premise that sounded legitimate: governance, stability, oversight concerns, reasonable business rationale. And she agreed to be available for a vote without fully understanding what the vote was actually designed to accomplish. She paused. Or I'm wrong about that, and she knows exactly what she agreed to, and Sunday afternoon she's sitting somewhere deciding whether the Voss side of this is still viable. You can't know which one it is until Monday. No, she said, I can't. That was where Sunday had left them, on the edge of something that would resolve itself in its own time, regardless of how much either of them thought about it between now and morning. Yeah. Mason picked Lily up from Ruth's at 9 on Sunday morning and brought her home, and the afternoon was deliberately ordinary. He fixed the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for 3 weeks. Lily sat on the counter and handed him tools and asked questions with the specific persistence of a child who finds the inner workings of things genuinely interesting, which was one of his favorite things about her. Amelia was at the kitchen table with her laptop, and occasionally Lily would look over at her with that frank child's gaze, and Amelia would look back and there'd be a small exchange, Lily asking something direct and slightly random, Amelia answering it without condescension, which Lily responded to well because children always know when an adult is taking them seriously. At one point Lily said, without particular context, "Are you going to be around more?" Amelia looked at her. Then at Mason, who was under the sink and couldn't see his own expression, which was probably just as well. "I'm not sure yet," Amelia said. "Maybe." Lily considered this. "Dad doesn't have a lot of friends from work," she said. "Mostly just Derek, and Derek talks too much." From under the sink, "Lily." "It's true," Lily said, without remorse. Amelia looked at the table for a moment. Then she said quietly enough that it was almost just to herself, "I don't either, actually." Monday came the way it was always going to come, without drama, without warning, just the alarm and the gray light and the specific weight of a day that had been 4 days in the building. Mason drove Lily to school first. She'd wanted a specific braid she'd seen somewhere, and he'd attempted it twice, and the second attempt was almost recognizable as the thing she'd described, and she'd looked at it in the mirror and said it was pretty good, in the tone of someone grading on a curve, which he accepted as reasonable. He watched her walk in through the school doors, and he sat in the parking lot for 2 minutes doing nothing, the way he sometimes did, just marking the moment. Then he drove downtown. Orion Systems looked exactly like itself from the street. Glass tower, brushed steel lobby, the flag out front moving slightly in the off-the-water wind. He'd parked in the contractor lot so many times in the past 3 weeks that it was muscle memory now. 3rd row, left side, where the overhead lights still didn't work. He wasn't a contractor today. He was there as a witness, technically. Marcus had arranged it, his presence requested as part of the evidentiary record for the board presentation. He had his affidavit, his notes, his phone, with the photographs he'd taken of the camera housings before filing his correction reports. He wore the same gray jacket. Amelia was in the lobby when he came through the main entrance. She'd arranged his visitor credentials herself, which meant he came in the front door instead of the loading entrance, which was a different experience. The lobby looked the way expensive lobbies look when the people who built them are under pressure. Clean surfaces holding up, the ambient confidence slightly strained at the edges, staff who knew something was happening and were managing the knowledge professionally. She was in a dark suit, her hair back, the watch. She looked like the person who ran the building because she was the person who ran the building. and whatever the last 4 days had done to her. And they'd done things. He could see the traces of it, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way she held herself a degree more carefully than she had on Thursday. She'd put herself back together with the particular determination of someone who understood that the job required it. "How are you?" he asked. "Ask me in 3 hours." She looked at him directly. "Ready?" "I've been ready," he said. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor. 13 chairs around an oval table, a presentation screen at one end, the bay view out the windows that always made the room look like a statement about what Orion was and where it stood. Marcus was already there, papers organized with the precision of someone who'd been up since 4. Clara was at a side station with a second laptop and backup documentation. 3 of Orion's independent directors had arrived early and were standing in a cluster near the windows talking in low voices. Voss was already seated. He was 53, well-dressed in the careful way of someone who understood that appearance communicated position, and he was reading something on his tablet with an expression of practiced neutrality. He looked up when Amelia entered the room. Their eyes met for a moment, 2 people who had sat in this room 11 times before and were now sitting in it for the first time as what they actually were to each other. He nodded. Professionally. Like nothing had happened. Like this was an ordinary Monday. She nodded back the same way, and went to her seat at the head of the table, and Mason took the chair along the side wall where the witnesses sat, and Marcus set a copy of the board packet in front of each seat, with the methodical calm of a man who had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. Patricia Sloane came in at 9:58, 2 minutes before the scheduled start. She sat in her usual seat, third from the left. She didn't look at Voss. She didn't look at Amelia. She set her own tablet on the table and folded her hands and looked at the presentation screen like someone who had made a decision and was going to sit with it. Mason watched her hands, still, not clenched, not anxious, still. He thought, she's going to be okay. He didn't know that for certain. He'd been wrong about people before and he'd be wrong again. But the particular quality of stillness he was reading, not the stillness of someone containing fear, but the stillness of someone who has gotten past fear to the other side of it, matched something he recognized from people who had made a hard decision and arrived at it honestly. At 10 o'clock, Amelia said, "Let's begin." The presentation took 40 minutes. Marcus led the technical documentation, the server archive, of the access logs, the corporate structural analysis connecting Hunter Cole's hiring to Voss's network. He presented it the way good lawyers present evidence, without drama, with precision, letting the material do the work rather than performing outrage on its behalf. When he got to the section on Voss's appointment, he presented the documented connection to the same governance advisory network with the same even tone he'd used for everything else. Voss interrupted twice. Both times his objections were procedural, questions about the chain of custody of the server data, questions about the admissibility of Cole's disclosed statements, given his pending criminal proceeding. Both times Marcus answered him directly and completely. The second time, one of the independent directors said, in a dry voice from the far end of the table, "Marcus, can we move on?" Which was its own kind of answer. Then Amelia spoke. She didn't use notes. She stood at the head of the table and she laid out the 22 months, not as a victim's account, not as a crisis narrative, but as an operational analysis. What had happened, how it had happened, what it revealed about the gaps in Orion's internal controls, what she intended to do about each gap going forward. She was specific. She was honest about the things she'd missed, and honest about why she'd missed them without making the honesty performative. She was, Mason thought, the most purely competent person he'd ever watched work. Not because she was flawless, but because she'd looked at her own failures with the same clear-eyed directness she brought to everything else, and had built a response that was proportional and real. At one point she said, "I trusted my security infrastructure because I built it. I should have been asking, continuously, whether the people inside it deserve the same trust as the systems. I wasn't asking that question. I'm going to be asking it from now on." Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Then she said, "I'm also going to be asking it about this board." Voss shifted. "Garrett." She said his name the same way Hunter had said hers in the Port District, without the professional courtesy of the title, direct and clear. The documentation in front of you shows a 14-month relationship between your appointment to this board and a corporate network controlled by Xavier Voss. That documentation was compiled from Orion's own systems and corroborated by the criminal disclosure of Hunter Cole, who is currently cooperating with a federal investigation. She held his gaze. I'm going to ask you directly, in front of this board, to resign your seat. Today. The room was very still. Voss looked at his tablet, then at the table, then at Amelia. Something moved through his expression. Several things, actually, in quick succession, the way a person's face works through options when options are running out. He settled on something that was trying to be composure. I intend to contest the characterization, he started. You can contest it in federal court, Marcus said. Not unkindly, just precisely. The board motion before us today doesn't require you to agree with the characterization. It requires a vote. Voss was quiet. Then Patricia Sloan said, without looking up from the table, I'll second the motion. The room absorbed that. Voss looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who had gotten past the hard part and was simply on the other side of it now. The vote was 11-1. Voss voted against his own removal, which was either principle or reflex. Mason couldn't tell, and it didn't matter. The motion carried. Marcus noted it in the record. Voss closed his tablet, picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and walked out of the boardroom without speaking, and the door clicked shut behind him with a sound that was exactly as quiet as the door of Amelia's conference room when Mason had left it 11 days ago. The specific irony of that was not lost on him. The board meeting continued for another hour after Voss left. Operational items, the framework for the external security audit. Marcus had prepared a preliminary vote authorizing the restructuring of Orion's internal oversight protocols. Patricia Sloan participated in each item with the focused engagement of someone doing penance through usefulness. And when the meeting concluded, she was the first one to Amelia's side of the table. I owe you an explanation, she said quietly. You owe me a conversation, Amelia said. Not today, but soon. Sloan nodded. She looked at Amelia with something that wasn't quite shame, more like the expression of a person who has looked clearly at something they did and understands it fully for the first time. He told me it was governance reform, structural oversight, that the company needed adult supervision. She stopped. That's the language he used. I should have asked more questions. Yes, Amelia said. You should have. Sloan left. The room emptied gradually until it was just Amelia, Marcus, Clara, and Mason, and the view out the windows and the remains of a crisis that had consumed 4 days and would take considerably longer than that to fully process. Marcus was packing his briefcase with the satisfied efficiency of someone who has done a hard thing correctly. Federal filing moves forward this week. Voss's attorneys will try to slow the discovery process. Standard play. They'll file 3 motions by Thursday. We'll respond to each one. He snapped the briefcase shut. He's not walking away from this. The only question is how long he tries to before he runs out of road. Let him try, Amelia said. That's exactly the right attitude. Marcus looked at Mason. Your affidavit was clean. If this goes to trial, it'll hold. I've seen career witnesses do worse. Hope it doesn't go to trial, Mason said. Hope is not a legal strategy, but in this case I share the sentiment. Marcus offered his hand. Mason shook it. Amelia. He nodded at her and went to the door and then paused, which was uncharacteristic enough that both of them looked at him. I've worked with Orion for 7 years, he said. You built something genuinely good here. I'm glad it's still yours. Then he left, because Marcus was a person who said the real thing once and didn't repeat it. Clara was organizing her materials at the side station with the quiet efficiency that was her natural mode, and after a moment she said without looking up, I'm going to take the rest of today off. Take the week, Amelia said. Clara looked up, slightly surprised. You were held in a warehouse staging area on a Thursday evening, Amelia said. Take the week. I'm fine, Clara said, which was what Clara always said. I know you're fine. Take the week anyway. Amelia looked at her directly. You're allowed to be affected by things, Clara, even if you're fine. Something shifted in Clara's face, small, quickly managed. Okay, she said. Thank you. She picked up her bag and went to the door, and then she said, over her shoulder, the camera in the east corridor is still oriented wrong, by the way. Mason flagged it in a second report. Facilities still hasn't actioned it. Then she left. Mason looked at the ceiling briefly. Amelia looked at him. You filed a second report? Last Tuesday, before Thursday happened. He paused. The first one didn't get actioned. She shook her head slowly. Then she laughed. A real one, brief and slightly helpless. The kind that comes out when the accumulated weight of something finally finds an exit that isn't grief. It lasted about 4 seconds, and then she was composed again, but the composition was different after it, lighter by some small but real amount. I'll get the camera fixed, she said. I know how to fix it myself if you want. She looked at him. I know you do. She turned toward the window. The bay out there. Gray-green water. Container ships in the distance. The ordinary ongoing life of a city that had not noticed that a company's future had just been decided in a room on the 32nd floor. I meant what I said Friday, about rebuilding the security structure. I remember. I want to offer you a role in it. She turned back. Not a contractor role, a leadership role. Oversight of physical security and threat assessment, reporting directly to me, not through any intermediate chain, salary that reflects what the job actually requires. She paused. You'd set your own hours within reason. You'd have final say on security protocol decisions. And you could work from Tacoma most of the time, because I've spent the last 4 days conducting a company-saving operation from a kitchen table in Tacoma, and the arrangement appears to be functional. He was quiet for a moment. That's a real offer, he said. It's a real offer. He looked at the table. He thought about Lily asking if Amelia would be around more, and about Reyes, and about the specific weight that some things carry regardless of how long you've been carrying them, and about check engine lights that you decide to deal with tomorrow, and about a company that sold security and had learned in the hardest possible way the difference between what security looked like and what it actually was. He thought about a junction box indicator light cycling wrong and the 2 minutes it took to trace it, and the fact that he'd traced it because it was the kind of thing he couldn't not trace, which was both his most useful quality and the reason he'd spent 3 weeks in a contractor lot and 1 week in a federal crisis, and would spend some portion of the rest of his life being exactly the same way about the next thing and the thing after that. I need to think about it, he said. I know, she said. Take whatever time you need. My first priority is Lily. Whatever the job looks like, that doesn't change. I know that too. She said it without qualification. It shouldn't change. It's not a negotiating position. It's just true. The job exists around that, not instead of it. He nodded slowly. He looked at the window, the view she looked at every day from 32 floors up, the water, the distance, the ordinary world continuing its business below. The camera on the east corridor, he said. What about it? I can fix it today, before I leave. He picked up the bag he'd brought with him, the same work bag, the toolkit he'd walked into her conference room with 11 days ago. It'll take about 15 minutes. She looked at him for a moment, then at the bag, then back at him, and something in her face did a thing that wasn't professional and wasn't managed. It was just a person, momentarily unguarded, seeing something clearly. Yeah, she said. Okay. He fixed the camera. It took 12 minutes, not 15. The housing bracket had drifted about 8 degrees off its mount, the same type of adjustment he'd corrected on the other two, the same small, deliberate sabotage made to look like settling. He realigned it, tested the signal on his phone through the Facilities app, confirmed the field of view was clean, tightened the mount screws. He was closing the housing when he heard footsteps and looked down the corridor, and it was Amelia, coffee cup in hand, watching him work. Signals clean? She asked. Clean, he said. He stepped down from the step stool. All 3 corridors have clean coverage now. First time in however long. Probably since Hunter made the adjustments. He folded the step stool. 8, 10 months maybe. Hard to know exactly without the original installation logs. She nodded. She looked at the camera housing. Just a housing, just a piece of hardware on a wall, unremarkable, except for what its misalignment had meant and what correcting it meant. Mason. She said his name the way she'd said it in the kitchen in Tacoma, not the controlled version, just the regular one. Why did you come back Thursday night? You were in the rear vehicle. You understood what was happening. You had options that didn't involve breaking someone's wrist in a port district at 7:30 in the evening. He'd been waiting for that question since she'd started to ask it in the warehouse tunnel in the outline of the story they were both now living inside of, and the answer was the same one he'd always known it would be. Because leaving someone behind when you can go back. He stopped, tried again. I made a promise to myself a long time ago, after Reyes, that I wouldn't make the calculation where I weigh my own safety against whether I go back. Not when I can still go back. He looked at her directly. It's not heroism. It's the thing I decided. And you were in there because you didn't have the right information, and I had some of it, and walking away from that didn't sit right with me, regardless of what had happened in your conference room. She was quiet for a long moment. You said something to me, she said. When we were getting into the car, you said, get in the car, right now. Not please, not ma'am. Just an instruction, direct. It was an urgent situation. I know. She almost smiled. It was the first time in probably 3 years that someone told me to do something without asking permission first. And I did it. She paused. There's something in that, about the kind of authority that's real and the kind that's performed. He thought about that. Most authority I've been around, real authority. It's just clarity. You know what needs to happen, and you say it, and you stand behind it. That's it. The performed version is the same words in a different voice, and people can always tell the difference. They just don't always say so. I've been performing some of it, she said. Not all, but some. I know. She looked at him. You knew in the conference room. I knew you were under pressure, he said. I didn't know what you'd look like when you weren't. And now? He picked up his bag. He looked at her. The suit, the watch, the view behind her through the corridor window, the building she'd built around herself that was still hers because she'd had the right information at the right time and had known what to do with it and hadn't been alone in the dark when it mattered most. Now I know, he said. He called her from his truck in the parking lot, which she would have found strange if she'd known. He sat there for 4 minutes just thinking, the way he sometimes sat, and then he called. She answered on the second ring. The job, he said. I'll take it. A pause. That was fast. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it. 4 minutes? I'm efficient? He started the engine. I have conditions. Tell me. Lily's school schedule doesn't bend. If something comes up that conflicts, the job bends, not the schedule. Agreed. I pick my own team. You can have approval authority, but I'm not inheriting a structure I didn't build. Agreed. And the ticket system, he said. The 48-hour response window for non-critical security flags. What about it? It's gone. Anything I flag goes directly to you, same day. There was a pause that had something in it. Recognition, maybe, or the specific feeling of a person understanding that a thing they'd allowed to be wrong is finally going to be made right. Agreed, she said. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. He pulled out of the contractor lot. The check engine light came on at the parking lot exit, the same as always, and he thought about whether to deal with it today or tomorrow, and he thought about Lily and the braided hair that was almost right, and tacos on Thursday nights, and a stuffed rabbit with a worn ear, and Ruth 3 blocks over who watched a little girl when her father had to be somewhere difficult. He thought about Reyes, the way he thought about Reyes regularly, not with the heavy grief of the first years, but with the particular love you carry for someone you lost doing the thing both of you believed in. He thought, I hope I'm doing something worth doing. I think today I was. He took the highway south toward Tacoma, toward a school that was letting out in 90 minutes, toward an 8-year-old who was going to ask how the day went, and to whom he would say, fine, it went fine, and mean it for the first time in a while. He didn't know exactly what the next chapter of this looked like. He didn't know how the Voss prosecution would unfold, how long the rebuilding would take, what it would mean practically to work for a company he'd spent 3 weeks watching from the outside. He didn't know what it meant that he'd spent 4 days in a crisis with a woman he'd met 11 days ago, and that the 4 days had the particular density of things that matter and leave marks. He knew Lily needed new shoes. She'd mentioned it twice, and he'd filed it and not acted on it, which was a failure of a different kind than the ones he'd been managing all week. He took the exit for Tacoma. The check engine light stayed on. He decided to deal with it tomorrow. Some things you carry because you can't put them down yet. Some things you carry because you've decided they're worth it. The hard part, the real work, the daily unglamorous practice of it, is learning to tell the difference. Mason Reed had been learning that difference for a long time, through deployments and loss and a daughter who needed him to show up every single ordinary day. And he hadn't gotten it perfectly right every time, and he wouldn't going forward either. But he knew this: you go back when you can go back. You say the true thing when you know the true thing. You fix the camera that nobody else thought to check. And when someone finally hears you, really hears you, after the noise and the crisis and the cost of getting to the other side of the truth, you don't say, "I told you so." You just pick up your bag and get to work.